Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the Timeless Movie Podcast, episode number 191. My name is Victor Vasquez. Appreciate you joining me on this episode in this channel where all we do is talk and discuss movies. I hope you all are having a great start to the month of May. We have officially kicked off the summer blockbuster months of 2026. What's the movie that kicked it off? Well, that's going to be today's episode, but before we get there, before we start talking about this week's movie, little housekeeping that I want to do. Timeless Movie Podcast, episode 190. Have you checked it out? Have you listened to it? Did you even know that the episode was up? Well, this is your chance to go back and listen to it because I had my brother join me on episode 190 to talk all about the new music biopic called Michael. That's right. It is the story, at least the early stage of Michael Jackson's career. A lot of opinions have been thrown out there into the ether, whether it's on different social media platforms, on YouTube, you name it. Everybody's got an opinion about this respective movie. So if you want to hear me and my brother's opinions about the movie itself, well, go check out episode 190 of the podcast. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Drop in a comment, subscribe, follow the channel, follow us on any social media platforms. You can find all of those links down below in the description of wherever you are listening. And I would love to hear you guys' thoughts about Michael and any other movie that we end up covering in the summer blockbuster season. All right, speaking of summer blockbusters, let's talk about the first film that's kicking off 2026 in the summer, and it is The Devil Wears Prada 2. That is right. This is the follow-up 20 years exactly to 2006, Devil Wears Prada. I actually had never seen the first film until, I want to say maybe 3 weeks ago. I wanted to watch it. I had heard from my wife that this movie is just an awesome and it's timeless for her. And so I wanted to give it a shot, and I wasn't disappointed. I had a great time with the movie. I actually was surprised that it wasn't as funny, or I for some reason thought that it was going to be all comedy, but no, it actually had some really strong themes and interesting concepts about how we in 2006 thought about work and the culture of working in an industry such as fashion or journalism and things of that nature. But I actually enjoyed Devil Wears Prada, so it got me even more hyped and pumped to check out this movie. Also, if you ended up watching one of our early videos in January of 2026, I actually chose The Devil Wears Prada 2 as my favorite movie of the month of May. Kind of cheated because, it came out in April. We watched it on the last day of April. But anyway, if you haven't seen that one, I put a link here on the YouTubes. And if you're listening on any other platform, you can search for Best Movies of 2026. All right, that's enough of me rambling about Devil Wears Prada and me watching it. Let's dive into Devil Wears Prada 2. We're going to start with some non-spoiler stuff. We'll give a little bit of a summary of the plot. We'll talk about who comes out in it, who directed it, and then our high-level thoughts after we watched it. All right, Devil Wears Prada 2. It is directed by David Frankel, who actually directed the original Devil Wears Prada, or I guess not original, but first entry into this now franchise. But he's also made films such as Marley and Me, as well as Collateral Beauty. Now, in Devil Wears Prada 2, we have the core cast that came out in the first film. We have the return of Meryl Streep. We have Anne Hathaway, Emily Blunt, and Stanley Tucci. But in this film, the sequel, we have a couple of new faces. We have Simone Ashley, we have Kenneth Branagh, we have Tracy Toms, we have Patrick Bromale, and Lucy Liu. Now, in The Devil Wears Prada 2, what is this about? Well, let me give you a little synopsis, very high level. We return and are introduced again to Andy, who is played by Anne Hathaway. Now, Andy is having a great career as a journalist. However, after some unforeseen circumstances, Andy is put in a position where she is once again face to face with Miranda Priestley, who runs Runway. And this time, she's actually going to be helping Runway with different types of editorial features and writing about Runway and kind of putting them in a specific type of positive light. However, both Andy and Miranda are dealing with how their industries are changing now that 20 years has passed. And they both kind of have to figure out how they are going to adapt. So that's kind of a high level summary of what goes down in The Devil Wears Prada 2. Let's now move over to my overall thoughts. After watching The Devil Wears Prada 2, I got to say that I had a great time watching this movie. Whenever we have legacy sequels like this, it's been 20 years since we got the first Devil Wears Prada. My question for this film and any other legacy sequel that I've seen so far and any that come after is why? Why do you want to make another sequel? What is the purpose of returning not only to this universe that they've built, but the same characters? Sometimes some films can kind of get away with making a legacy sequel because maybe you're introducing a new cast of characters, or there's some other type of connection that you're trying to say, or a story that you're trying to build. In this case, you're bringing back the original cast. So what is the reasoning? Why are all of these characters that have lived in this world, what are they doing differently in 20 years? What are you trying to explain? Now, I mentioned a little bit before when I was talking about the background of me watching The Devil Wears Prada. I mentioned that it had really strong concepts. If you have seen The Devil Wears Prada that came out in 2006, that film deals with more of the work culture, how toxic it can be, but also how much you are willing to sacrifice in order to achieve something in a role or a job that you're in. And it did that in a really cool way through Andy and her perspective of joining Runway and seeing how people take fashion so seriously. In this film, the why is answered by basically explaining, what do you do when your industry that you have been so successful in, what happens when it starts changing? What do you individually as a person who has had a lot of skills and expertise, what happens when the entire industry around you is completely changing and going a different direction? Do you accept it? Do you let it just take it over? Or do you stand your ground and try to fight as much as you can and adapt in order to still find some success? So, in my opinion, I feel like The Devil Wears Prada 2 answered that why. It answered it by giving us this concept and this process of, hey, yes, these are the same characters, but look, it's been 20 years. Look how fashion has changed. Look how journalism has changed. Nobody reads newspapers or articles as much. It's all digital. So how does this digital world affect these industries and the people that are in them? And so I thought they did a really cool job with that kind of a concept. So to me, it worked in regards to answering the question of, why are we bringing this universe, this world back with these characters? Now, something that I always bring up and try to explain is pros and cons on this podcast. For me, this really works because I'm able to kind of expand a little bit more rather than just kind of giving some very high level thoughts. I can kind of pinpoint what worked and what didn't. So let's go ahead now and segue into the pros and cons. All right, first pro that I have for The Devil Wears Prada 2. What worked for me? I got to say that I really liked how they tackled the changes that the industry of fashion and journalism have gone through. I really appreciated them showing how it really is, if you work for a corporation, if you work for some type of a business that has many employees, there always comes a situation when something happens where budget cuts come into play. Either certain departments are cut in half or removed entirely, or the audience itself doesn't consume your materials and content the same way. And they highlighted that for both Miranda and Andy. For Andy as a journalist, I mean, the obvious one is that nobody really reads as much articles that are physical. It's all through links. It's all through clickbait titles. How do you try to capture that information and keeps people attention in an industry like this where it's just so changing? Everybody's looking for different ways to obtain information. And then for fashion, the same way. You know, one of the big pieces of the first Devil Wears Prada, the biggest focus was this one big book that Miranda was always actively trying to make sure that it contained the right pieces of fashion. And then they even called it out in the movie where that piece isn't as important. And so how they tackled and showed the difficulties of, hey, these industries may have been really big and popping in 20 years ago, but now we're trying to just survive. We're trying to show that, hey, we got to change up the way that we think about it. I also like that they highlighted that it's also how evil some corporations are, how corporations only focus on their bottom line. Okay, hey, if it's not making us money, if it's not getting a lot of attention and not getting a lot of traffic, let's cut it. Let's reduce the number of people that are working. Hey, if you've been working here for more than 5 years, you're too expensive. And so it just kind of gave you that spotlight of here's kind of how it actively is, and then also showing you how crummy some executives are. You could be cutting so many departments and laying off a bunch of people, and then the executives still making a bonus. And so it shows you that kind of light. It's not the first time a movie does that, but it's able to still kind of show you the behind the scenes of even a company like Runway, in which in Devil Wears Prada, they made it seem like it's one of the most highly coveted. Everybody wants a job here. How even they are struggling to try to capture an audience. So again, they didn't have all the answers. That's also the tough thing about making a movie with this type of a topic when you're dealing with AI and technology. The film's not going to give you all the answers, right? The film's just trying to tell you that, hey, are you going to try to adapt, or are you going to let your fate be accepted in that, hey, this industry is over. I'm just going to have to let it die. And so I like the way that they highlighted the changes in industries and also the ways that Andy and Miranda both tried to adapt to their situations. All right, second pro that I have for The Devil Wears Prada is just like the first film, the music in this movie it just works. I mean, it gives the film such a good vibe of energy, but it also makes the movie feel like it's going by very quick. There's various montages, and the montages always work. That was one of the highlights that I had for The Devil Wears Prada in 2006 was the various montages that they would have for Miranda or for Andy, either walking around New York or in the office. But whatever needle drop they had, whether it was Vogue by Madonna, whether it was a Lady Gaga song, any kind of song, they nailed it. And so props to the folks that worked on the music and developed the soundtrack and just a lot of bangers in this specific soundtrack. So again, shout out to the music in The Devil Wears Prada 2. They continued on with the great legacy that the first film had in 2006. All right, third pro, super quick. It's the performances. Whether it's Meryl Streep, the GOAT, I mean, in anything she's in, she's pretty much going to be a highlight. But Anne Hathaway, Emily Blunt, Stanley Tucci, they all have not played these characters in 20 years, but they all just so seamlessly went into those roles, and it just felt so natural. It felt like, yeah, they were just riding a bike. They got into a rhythm. It felt believable, whether it was banter between Miranda and Andy or Nigel or Emily. It all just worked so well. And again, that's especially when you're counting on a legacy sequel to bring back what worked in the first film, which is the chemistry between some of the characters. That all was fulfilled in this film. All right, and then last but not least, I'm pretty sure some people might be surprised, but I want to call out the costume design of this movie. Now, I want to make it clear, I am not an expert in any way or a huge fan of the fashion world. If you were to see my fashion, you would just see that I'm pretty basic. I wear the same three colors every single time. I wear black, blue, gray sometimes, and white. I mean, it's not anything crazy. Sometimes I mix it up with a couple of different colors like maroon or green. But I still want to say that the costume design of everything that the characters are wearing, it just pops. It makes you pay attention, especially when Andy, played by Anne Hathaway, whenever she has her montages and she's wearing different types of clothes, different jackets, the dresses that she wears to go to the Hamptons or things of that nature, everything just seems so cool. It makes you pay attention a little bit more. But the other aspect that I also like to call out is I feel like every character, their clothes represents who they are. You see Miranda, and she's always has some type of style that nobody else has because she's a visionary. She has the style of what people would expect or would want to have as like a future item to wear. And then you see Nigel always wearing some classy suits. And then Andy, calling it out even in the film, wearing vintage stuff or wearing things that she might thrift. And so everybody's got a specific style in this movie, but it represents their personality and some type of, trait that they have in this movie, which I thought was really cool. All right, I'm going to make this section very quick. From a cons and nitpick perspective, I don't really have much. So Again, I'm not saying that the movie is flawless. I'm not saying that it is the best movie of 2026 so far. It is not for me, but I just had nothing that I noticed or had to call out in regards to things that I didn't like about the movie. So I think this is a great opportunity now then to jump into some spoilers. So if you have not seen The Devil Wears Prada 2, please jump out of the podcast now because I'm going to start spoiling some key moments. I want to call out some scenes that I really enjoyed, what happened, who's the antagonist, is there one in this film? So again, if you don't want to be spoiled, please jump out of the podcast now. That way you guys will not be spoiled by what I will say next. All right, everybody. Hopefully that's enough of a break. Let's dive into some spoilers of The Devil Wears Prada 2. So, where do I want to start? Well, I talked a lot about the why when it comes to legacy sequels. So, let me give you that reasoning. Why is Andy, played by Anne Hathaway, meeting with Miranda, played by Meryl Streep again? Why are they interacting or working together after 20 years? Well, the reasoning behind this is there was a specific article that went through around and about Runway. But Miranda, because of how busy she was, she didn't vet the article and it ended up painting Runway in a very negative light. And so Irv, the CEO, and Irv is played by Tibor Feldman, he ends up enlisting Andy, who is a skilled and has a lot of expertise when it comes to writing and articles and journalism. So Irv ends up enlisting Andy in order to help Runway in order to build different types of articles and, again, paint the picture that Runway is still got what it takes to be the top of the fashion world. And so that is basically what puts Miranda and Andy back together. And as you would expect, you are waiting for this interaction. The first time that Andy and Miranda meet, you're expecting there to be a lot of sass and a lot of different types of, attitude that Miranda has. And as you would expect, Miranda does not remember anything about Andy, at least in that moment. But eventually they start kind of building that relationship. But just wanted to explain that to kind of kick off the spoilers. What was the reasoning behind them working together? And I really like that reason. They needed somebody to write better articles for Runway, and who better than Andy, who's already had some experience with the company before. Also, second point that I want to bring up as a spoiler is who were the antagonists or who were the individuals that would kind of combat Andy in this go around of the second film. And who the individuals were basically Emily, played by Emily Blunt, as well as her boyfriend or fiance, who was played by Justin Theroux, and his name is Benji. And so both of these individuals were the antagonists. Now, why? Well, the reason why is because the big twist of the movie is that, Irv ends up passing away. I don't think it was explained as to why. I don't know if it was his age or for a heart attack, but he ends up passing away. And this puts the Runway company in limbo because now the son of Irv, played by BJ Novak, he ends up thinking about, maybe I want to sell this company. And who wants to come in? Well, Emily and Benji come in to try to purchase Runway. And the first thing Emily wants to do is get rid of Miranda. And why does she want to get rid of Miranda? Well, because Emily no longer works at Runway. She used to be the assistant, number one, right under Miranda, but she was pushed out. And Miranda had such a vicious and cold line in the movie where she just goes right face to face with Emily and says, "You were never a visionary. You're just a vendor." And it's like, hey, it was just brutal. The way that Meryl Streep delivers the line is just freaking awesome. But that was really the main twist of the movie, is that Emily wanted to purchase and buy Runway just to show, and in spite of Miranda, to fire her and run it the way that she wants to run it. So that was kind of like the main kind of tension throughout the movie. I wanted to kind of call out a couple of things before we kind of get to the end of the film, but some things that I thought were nailed within this film is the conversations between some characters, the banter. I mean, again, like I mentioned this as a pro, but whether it was Meryl Streep talking to Anne Hathaway or Meryl Streep and Stanley Tucci, these four actors, Anne Hathaway, Meryl Streep, Emily Blunt, Stanley Tucci, anytime there was any banter, any conversation, it all felt so smooth. Like I mentioned it before, I'm going to say it again. It was like they were riding a bike. They went right back into their characters. Nigel, played by Stanley Tucci, just always having some quips talking about Andy. And all of that just worked so well. And so I really enjoyed those aspects of anytime there was a conversation between one of these four actors, I was glued to the screen because I wanted to see what were the funny lines were going to be said or what type of attitude Miranda was going to have towards Andy. But all of that really worked. Okay, and then how did the movie end? What ended up happening to kind of wrap this movie up? Well, in the end, Emily and Benji are actually not able to purchase Runway. Instead, Lucy Liu's character of Sasha, she is a also a billionaire and she cares about the fashion industry. She actually comes in and purchases Runway as well, and she gives Miranda full access to basically and a full budget to be able to really do whatever she wants with the global content of Runway. And so that's kind of how the movie ends. The reason Lucy Liu's character of Sasha ends up coming in is because, well, she hasn't had any press or any type of conversation or interview in over 3 years. And who's able to get that interview? Well, of course, it's Andy, the skilled journalist who does nothing until she finds an opportunity to get a yes out of somebody. So she took every no and just ignored it and kept asking and asking and asking. And she finally was able to get in front of Lucy Liu's character of Sasha. And that kind of opened the door for her being able to just believe in Andy and Miranda and purchase Runway so that they can control it and do whatever they want with it. So that's kind of how the movie kind of ends. And then you also get a little tidbit. At the end, Nigel has a conversation with Andy, and you get to find out the big reveal that it actually wasn't Irv before he passed away that brought in Andy to Runway. It was actually Nigel. Nigel set everything in motion because after that article went out and people started talking bad about Runway, well, what did Nigel do? Well, he always kept an eye on his girl, Andy, and ended up putting that kind of little tidbit to Irv and his son in order to bring in Andy. So everything was set in motion because of Nigel. So he was the mastermind. He was the puppeteer that was setting everything behind the scenes. So that was really cool to see. And then last but not least, a couple other things that I wanted to call out. I really like this one shot towards the end of the movie where you basically have the three leads, Stanley Tucci, Meryl Streep, and Hathaway, all on the same page. They all have offices together. But what was so cool is that you start in Andy's office and then it kind of pans out outside of the building. And then you see that Nigel's right next door. And then who's next door to Nigel? Well, it's Miranda's office. And all three of them seem like they're in sync for the first time. And then eventually it pans out even wider to show the New York skyline, which I thought was a very beautiful shot. You could never go wrong with the New York skyline. Am I right? But that I thought was one of the cool shots. And then what else? And then one other thing that I really liked. There was a conversation between Miranda and Andy towards the end of the film. There is a moment where, and I guess to kind of give a little bit more context, Andy throughout the movie is contemplating writing some type of a book about Miranda and her life and how she is an artist and always a visionary when it comes to fashion. But she hesitated. She didn't want to write this book because she felt like she was backstabbing Miranda in some way and telling parts of her life that shouldn't be told. And what did you find out at the end? Miranda actually knew that Andy was writing some pages and thinking about writing a book. And the coolest thing about that is that Miranda, one, I mean, her being a boss, she knows every little rumor, every little tidbit. Nothing can get past her about anything going around her world and her orbit. So it was cool that she knew. But what was also cool was that she did one thing. She advised Andy to actually still do the book. One reason she wanted her to do it was because they were offering Andy $350K to write the book. And so you see that Miranda has, although she is sometimes cold and very calculated, she also respects Andy so much that like, hey, you got to take this opportunity. That's not chump change. That can change your life in various different ways. So go for it. But the second piece of why she actually advised Andy to write the book was a reason that I really appreciated, which is she told her she wants people to know how hard it is to be something like how she is for Runway, how hard it is to be great, how much she has to sacrifice in order to actually succeed in something. And so Miranda viewed it from a bigger picture. Although she is kind of giving some tidbits away about how she is personally, she wants people to understand that not anybody can do what she does. So a lot of respect for that kind of a move by Miranda. But again, wanted to call that out because I thought that was a really clever conversation from Miranda of, you would expect her not to want a book to be made about her, but instead she's the complete opposite. She wants people to know and also to understand that, hey, you can't do this job. Only I can. And so thought that was a really cool touch. All right. That is all I got. Again, I really didn't do any kind of a deeper analysis of it. I just wanted to call out things that I really enjoyed and that I just really appreciated as I watched Devil Wears Prada 2. More importantly, though, I have two questions that we got to answer. First one, should you check this out in theaters? My opinion is going to be, yeah, go check it out. If you loved the first movie or if you liked the first movie, go watch it in theaters. I don't think you're going to be disappointed. To me, these films kind of stack up very similarly. They both have really good moments, great performances, great music. Again, both very similar, but they tell two different types of stories. Again, still related to the industries that they're in regards to fashion and journalism, but they really show the way that everything has changed and aged with technology. So I would say overall, my recommendation, go check this one out. All right. And then the last question of the day that we have here is Devil Wears Prada 2 a timeless movie? Now, this is where I might get some flack from some people because, my opinion, I think this film is not timeless. I do like it. I have said nothing but positive things about this movie. I wouldn't mind seeing some of the montages again, but I don't know. I don't know what else would make me want to push this to be timeless. I don't know if I needed a couple of more moments that would make me laugh, or a couple of other moments that just kind of stuck out to me. Again, I had a great time. I'm still recommending you guys go check it out, but I don't know. I don't know if there's anything else that brings me back into wanting to watch it, or if I were to go to a area to buy Blu-rays and I see this movie, would I buy it? Would I actually be motivated, or would I buy another movie? And so how I feel currently is I don't think it's a timeless movie today, but who cares what I think? I want to hear from all of you guys listening. What are your thoughts on The Devil Wears Prada 2? Are you in disagreement with me? Do you think this movie is timeless? If you do, let me know down below. I would love to hear your thoughts. I would love to read your opinions on what makes it timeless. Who was your favorite character? What were your favorite scenes? And what was your favorite needle drop of this movie as well? Let me know down below, or send me an email as well. timelessmoviepod@gmail.com. One more time, timelessmoviepod@gmail.com. Send them over. I'd be happy to read all of your guys' emails and thoughts. All right, everybody. Appreciate all of you sticking around to hear my thoughts about Devil Wears Prada 2. My name is Victor Vasquez. This has been episode number 191 of the Timeless Movie Podcast. Make sure you all check out our next episode as we cover a new film and we decide if it is timeless. All right, everybody. Appreciate you all. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you all later.